Hello and welcome to this week's edition of The Briefing Room. I'm your host, Bill Froehlich from WTCM Radio News. It's our weekly conversation with local journalists talking about some of the stories making headlines, and we're on location this week downtown at Horizon Books in Traverse City, and our thanks to Amy Reynolds and all the folks over at Horizon for letting us shoot on location today. And this week my guest is Eric VanDussen, freelance journalist. Eric, thanks so much for coming in.
No problem, Bill.
Appreciate you joining us, and it's good to actually get to sit down and have a lengthy conversation with you. I think our paths have maybe crossed a few times over the years, but
Yep.
You do a lot different work than a lot of the local journalists, whether it's newspaper, radio, television. Tell us about your time as a freelance journalist, how long you've been in northern Michigan, and really what got you started in journalism.
Well, I don't have any training as a journalist. I've been writing my whole life for different papers throughout my life, primarily like the Record Patriot in Benzie County. Different letters to the editor is what it started out as, just because I like to write. I started my freelance, I guess, career, if you would call it, when I was still building. I'm a builder by trade. I have been since high school, and about 5 or 6 years ago, my body just couldn't take it anymore, and I was writing freelance for Interlochen Public Radio and doing some stringer pieces for TV 7 and 4 and stuff on video for court proceedings. But that's basically how I got started, just by getting to know people in the local media outlets and becoming like a tipster to them, and also providing stringer pieces for them as well.
I was going to say that's kind of how I first heard your name, is when I was working at 7 and 4. And tell us about how that relationship, or even with Interlochen Public Radio, came to be, just in terms of, obviously there are things that you can get to. I don't know if you live in Benzie County, but things that you can do that you just have maybe you have the time for, that another radio or TV outlet just doesn't have the time or the manpower to get to every certain thing, and you provided an opportunity to fill that need.
Well, yeah, and that's like with TV 7 and 4 specifically. There's just limited amount of people that they have on staff to go cover this big area up here in northern Michigan. And for me, in Benzie County, if I have a camera, I borrow sometimes from Up North TV, and I'd film court proceedings, and then I would sell them to TV 7-4 after I'd broadcast them on Up North TV, because they have first use policy. And then they'd be able to use basically a 30-second clip out of a 2-hour-long clip I've shot in court, where I can stream the whole thing online and broadcast the entire court proceedings on Up North TV. You know, TV 7-4 is only going to use like a 15-second clip, probably not even any audio. So,
and to show obviously that you were there, you were on the scene, there's a presence there. What I assume maybe is nice for you, but correct me if I'm wrong, or tell me your thoughts on it, is, you know, you get that opportunity to go and spend 2 hours or shoot 2 hours of a story, whereas, you know, for TV we maybe get 30 minutes to an hour, and then we chop it down to 15 or 45 seconds. You know, you get a lot bigger opportunity to really soak in whatever it is you want, obviously, as your own boss.
Yeah, correct. And you know, it's different whoever I'm providing stringer pieces or freelance pieces to, on what they want. Like Interlochen Public Radio, for instance, I haven't done any work for them because I have a full-time job now. I haven't done any work for the last 6 months probably for them. But you know, I do lengthier pieces for them that would take me up to a month to put together. You know, and it really takes a lot of time and effort to put together. And you're taking a lot of different sources and interviews with different people and compiling it all down to a 5-minute piece. It might take you a month to put together, you know, for a 5-minute on-air piece. And that's what happens with TV broadcasts as well. I mean, for instance, I was talking to Joe Carter earlier about the Joni Holbrook murder trial in Benzie County. She was accused, and she's in prison now after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her husband at the time, who was a sergeant with the Michigan State Police,
Right.
and she allegedly shot him with his service revolver. And I was covering that for a long time, and IPR would take pieces of my audio from that coverage, and I'd stream 2 or 3 hours on Up North TV of the court proceedings, and the TV 7-4 would take that same clip and clip it into a 15-minute or 15-second, 30-second segment, and that's kind of what I did for quite a while, and then I found that it wasn't very economically feasible for me to sustain myself.
Okay.
With all my reporter friends, even at the Record Eagle, and everyone getting laid off, it was really hard to make a living as a freelancer and a stringer.
I was going to ask you if it drives you crazy, if it bothers you, or if it just kind of comes with the territory to go and spend a day down in a courtroom, and then you see it down into 20 seconds at night.
Well, it is quite interesting how that all works, and it took me a while to figure out that, and I'm going to spend all day doing something that's going to come down to 30 seconds,
right.
Right. To even get someone's attention, and it's kind of disheartening in a way, because you don't really get to tell the entire story. You're only telling like a little tidbit, and you know there's a lot more that people really should know, but there's a lot of other things on the news plate that day that take priority. So that's why I appreciate the Up North media platform, because you have the opportunity to take all that media and not necessarily have to edit it down to where you have to, I guess, to simplify it, to spoon feed it to people.
Right.
You can just give them unedited content that they can choose to watch the entire segment if they want, or they can fast forward through it and see which segments they want to watch. So that's one thing I really appreciate about Up North Media.
What was the first trial that you covered, and maybe secondarily off of that, what was the first thing you got paid for by another outlet?
I have to say, probably the Record Patriot in Benzie County paid me per piece that I would write for quite a while. For a few years when Jeff Sandman was the editor there, and that was probably my first paying gig, I guess you would say, as a freelance reporter. But I regularly wrote for them on a weekly basis. 7 and 4 probably started with the Joni Holbrook trial, where I was using Up North Media's equipment, broadcasting unedited content, and then selling little segments that I had cut out of it that I knew would be useful for like TV broadcast news to 7 and 4. So, but around the same time, I started working for IPR, doing stringer pieces for them as well, freelance, and using the same audio from the video that I had shot of those hearings. And that case never even went to trial because she took a plea, obviously. But that case progressed for a year before she took a plea. So it was quite a lengthy period of time, and I went to every single court hearing that they had and filmed every single one of the hearings on that case, because I found it very interesting myself, and it was in my hometown. I mean, the murder occurred probably 5 or 6 miles from where I lived at the time.
Yeah.
So I was really interested in it, and that's why I was following it.
What you have to maybe give me the background, I guess, into how you broke into, I guess, legitimizing yourself. I didn't know when I was at 7 and 4. I didn't know the background of how it came to be that either you contacted us or we contacted you, or at what point someone in the chain of command said, "Yeah, this guy knows what he's doing." Was there an effort, either in TV or in newsprint, to get out there and say, "I can do this for you. I'm competent"? Well,
I think it started with me, with my writing primarily started, and I started making contacts with the Record Eagle, Mike Tyree, the editor there.
Yeah.
I consider him a friend of mine now because I've known him for such a long time, and I provide them with all kinds of information all the time about stories that I know I can't even start to cover because I find out information that I know would make a good story, and I provide it to them or to IPR or 7 and 4 because I don't have the time. So that's where it started, was with my writing and contacting the Record Eagle and taking just, if I show up at an accident scene, I'm just prone to get out with my cameras and take pictures and email them to people or take my video to 7 and 4 or call IPR and talk to Peter Payette. And I just, formed all these relationships with these people, and I made a name for myself to where, I was credible, and they knew that the information I was providing was something that was newsworthy just by talking to me. They knew if I was calling them, I had something that was newsworthy. So I think that's where I built up my relationship with these different editors. And Roxanne Worley, I don't know if she's still at 7 and 4, but I formed a relationship with her, and anytime something came up in Benzie County, she started calling me to cover stuff. And sometimes I could, and sometimes I couldn't. But I guess that's how the relationships formed. And with Up North Media, I think I started contacting 7 and 4 when I was recording all the Holbrook coverage, all those hearings, asking them, because I had discussed with the staff at Up North Media their policies on using their equipment, and then they have a first use policy and whether or not I can sell content, but you can't sell content by using the public access television when you're using their equipment, but you can sell your editing skills, so I could edit clips and receive compensation for my editing, but give the clips away. So it was kind of a fine line that we worked out. So I think that's primarily how it all began.
So it's been, 4 or 5 years? How many stories do you think you've done for various outlets to this point? Have you lost track?
I have. It all depends on how many I've actually produced myself to how many I've been the catalyst for. It is probably a different number. The ones I produced, probably close to 100, I'd estimate. The ones that I've been the catalyst and pushed to put in the spotlight, hundreds. And that's probably lowballing it.
Yeah. We'll show folks on the screen now some of the websites that we can refer you to for taking a look at some of Eric's work. And I know that we'll put it on our blog as well. It's thebriefingroom.org. Eric, tell me, when you go into a courtroom, and maybe this goes back to 4 or 5 years ago or whenever you first started. I know that for TV folks, we've got to fill out the camera in courtroom request to turn that into the judge, and it identifies you with your media outlet and whatnot. We'll talk about the medical marijuana case here in just a moment, but what was the approach like for you, and did you get any questions from the judge or the court when you first walked in with the camera, not being an established, recognized media outlet? Were there questions about who you were and what you were doing there?
Well, that's a good question, and that's been it's been an interesting journey, actually, which has actually ended up with me having to sue the Michigan Court of Appeals over my access to film them. And I had to file an original complaint with the Supreme Court over that issue and sue the Michigan Court of Appeals because they were refusing to allow me to film primarily medical marijuana cases that were headed up through the appellate courts. And in the beginning, I think just from being in the Benzie County community, I formed a relationship with the local judges there before I even started thinking about bringing a camera into their courtrooms. Yeah. So they already knew of my journalism, I guess, credentials. I have a hard time saying that myself because I don't consider myself
a journalist,
a bona fide journalist, I guess would be the term, because I have a full-time job. I work for a defense attorney in town, and the freelance journalism has kind of taken a back seat currently.
Okay.
But that's how that started. And then once I got into the Benzie County courtrooms and I was familiar with all the procedures, I felt more comfortable, going into other circuit and district courts throughout the area. And I regularly even go down to Oakland County and film cases down there that primarily have to do with medical marijuana, because that's an interest of mine. So it has been a journey, and Up North Media has really been tremendous in that they've provided me with just information and advice on how to professionally present myself, and when I'm coming up against brick walls like the Court of Appeals saying no, you can't film, Up North Media personnel there have been an encouragement to me to pursue my legal avenues and actually filing suit against Court of Appeals judges that are refusing to allow me to film in their court proceedings. Yeah. And that led to me filming, I'd say, probably 15 cases in the Court of Appeals in the last few years, and probably 4 or 5 in the Michigan Supreme Court. And what I found kind of interesting was that the Michigan Supreme Court and their personnel had no problem whatsoever. They were just so helpful when I wanted to film in the Supreme Court, but the judges that are under them just were staunchly opposed to it, some of them. Huh. Not all of them, but there were certain panels that just did not want me in their courtrooms.
Well, I want to talk more about that when we come back here in just a minute. We're going to take a break. Again, the briefing room this week on location at Horizon Books. We got to go feed the parking meter. We'll be right back in just a moment.
What is Up North TV?
It's TV that you do.
You pick the topic.
You write the script. You run the camera.
You edit the video.
It's your vision.
Your perspective.
Your story.
Commercial free.
Free speech.
What is Up North TV?
It's me.
It's you.
It's all of us.
View us on Analog 97.
Cable digital too.
Digital 992.
upnorthmedia.org.
Welcome back to the briefing room. I'm Bill Froehlich, your host from WTCM Radio News. It is our weekly roundup of the stories making headlines with some of the people covering those stories. And this week, joined by freelance journalist, freelance writer Eric VanDussen. Eric, thanks again for coming in.
No problem.
Also want to thank Up North Media Center for helping us on location, and then Horizon Books this week, and Amy Reynolds for helping us out with this on-scene site location today. Eric, I wanted to ask you too about you mentioned before the break the filing suit against the Court of Appeals. You've done a lot with the Freedom of Information Act requests, and I think part of what makes you so successful and makes your work so attractive to other media outlets is you've got the time, theoretically, to do that. We talked earlier about how you can spend 2 hours in a courtroom, which is probably an hour and 40 minutes more than a lot of us can spend. But you've got, I guess, the time, the patience, the willingness, the determination to follow through on all of that. Tell me about, for example, Freedom of Information Act requests, and just what kind of diligence it takes in some cases to follow through with that information, and how much effort really goes into that.
Well, that's an interesting question, because the Freedom of Information Act, at least Michigan's, is one of the tools that I've used a lot throughout my freelance journalism career. And in Benzie County primarily, I've sued Benzie County and the Sheriff's Department probably 7-8 times over Freedom of Information Act and Open Meeting Act allegations, and I've won every one of my lawsuits against them because, hands down, they violated the act. Yeah. And a lot of that information I was seeking was public records pertaining to lawsuits against the county, because I was using that information for stories I was writing and putting together on the cost of litigation against our Sheriff's Department, because there was a lot of civil rights actions being filed in federal court against our local Sheriff's Department back in the early 2000s, 2000 to 2004 probably. And those lawsuits taught me a lot about how to access public records. I taught myself how to submit them and how to sue when the act is violated by public entities, and that's something that most journalists don't really get into because they have a legal department or an attorney on staff that would do that for them, where I didn't have money to go hire an attorney, and I figured out that I could come up with $150 to go file a complaint in the circuit court to compel the production of documents that obviously I was entitled to. So I think that's something that I taught myself, and I learned as I went that means was available to me to, if you run up against roads, there's a legal avenue to obtain those records. And I think the public should use the Freedom of Information Act more often and become more knowledgeable, because knowledge is power in our world.
And I think part of it has something to do with just the fact of, and you mentioned this earlier, the nature of the size of the operation. Up here in northern Michigan, TV, radio, newspaper, whatever it may be, if, for example, if I don't get a story within an hour, I've got to move on to something else. I've got to have something to churn out that day. So I may not have the time to devote, an hour, a week, a month to trying to get through all that paperwork and to go through and follow through all that process.
Yeah, and I'm lucky because I have an employer that gives me a lot of leeway in my time. I work sometimes I work for a defense attorney, Jesse L. Williams, who has an office around the corner, and I can do a lot of my work for him at night and still go out and be able to do some freelance stuff during the day if needs be, and that's really nice for me. But
I want to ask you about the medical marijuana case. Obviously, this just kind of maybe it officially ended with the state Supreme Court, but take me through the process, because we've had a lot of medical marijuana cases in the state, but this one obviously kind of the catalyst for a major decision, and you've been following it all along.
Yeah, and that case dealt with Rodney Kuhn, and it was here in Grand Traverse County, where he was pulled over and his blood was drawn. He was pulled over for speeding, and he showed, admittedly by the officer, no signs of impairment, but he admitted that he was a medical marijuana patient and had a marijuana pipe on him. And the officer decided to take him for a blood draw, and in his blood they found active THC, which is the active ingredient in THC that gives some of the medical effects of marijuana. And he was being prosecuted by the Grand Traverse County prosecutor. The district judge, I think Thomas Phillips, ruled that the Medical Marijuana Act, because he was a Medical Marijuana Act, would require a jury instruction that he was actually under the influence of marijuana while driving, not the old archaic law of you're per se intoxicated for having any amount of THC in your blood. Because Medical Marijuana Act has come out in 2008, it was enacted, and in I think 1978 was when the Public Health Code made THC a Schedule I narcotic. And their ruling, and Judge Rogers upheld that ruling and went even further and said that the Medical Marijuana Act supersedes, because it does, and that's what the Supreme Court recently ruled, it supersedes all other acts inconsistent with it. I'm paraphrasing the language in the act, but sure. The Supreme Court relied on the same language that Judge Rogers did when he upheld Judge Phillips' ruling, in stating that the Public Health Code that was enacted in 1978, that portion that scheduled THC as a Schedule I, was superseded by the medical marijuana law, which states that you cannot drive a vehicle or operate an airplane while under the influence of marijuana. So that's a different threshold than the per se any amount of THC in your blood, and that's a huge issue for all kinds of people. Well, then subsequent to that, it was appealed by the Grand Traverse County prosecutor. I went and filmed the oral arguments in that, and a few months later, it was overturned, Judge Rogers' opinion, by the Court of Appeals, And for the last year, the prosecutions of medical marijuana patients for driving with actual THC in their blood has skyrocketed. And thousands of people, I'm estimating, and you can't, I guess you could quote me. I mean, I guarantee thousands of patients, medical marijuana patients in Michigan, were prosecuted and have convictions on their records currently because they either took a plea bargain or were convicted of driving with actual THC in their blood with no signs of impairment, that still have those convictions on their record. And now the Supreme Court has said, no, you were all wrong. But what happens to that?
Well, that was going to be my question.
Do you go and retroactively apply this law, this ruling by the Supreme Court,
right,
to all these other people and try to set aside their convictions? I know that's something that defense attorneys are scurrying around trying to find an angle to do that. And I think that, this is my personal opinion, I believe that it is the prosecutor's duty to seek justice, and they should be the ones searching their files for those types of cases to purge them, and themselves going to these judges saying, look, the Supreme Court has ruled that we got this wrong, the judges got it wrong, the prosecutors got it wrong, let's correct all these convictions that were wrong, these wrongful convictions.
And what do you think the odds are of that happening?
That the prosecutors take the lead on this? Absolutely zero. I think that's zero. There might be one or two prosecutors that might be helpful, but I don't see it very likely.
Well, and I wondered the same thing as to how many of those who've already been convicted will try to go back now. I did a story maybe 4 or 5 years ago also of a gentleman who was in a casino parking lot.
Correct.
Remember this story?
It was a federal court case.
Yep, and he wasn't driving, but he came out of the casino. He was a medical marijuana patient, got in his car to smoke his medical marijuana, and got arrested for driving under the influence, even though he wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So similar circumstance, and obviously probably a lot more to come.
The attorney I worked for represented a gentleman, his name was Homer Williams, and he was convicted. Actually, the Antrim County Prosecutor's Office dismissed the charges against him because of Judge Rogers' ruling in the Kuhn case, because there was no sign of impairment in his case. And then the Court of Appeals overturned Judge Rogers' opinion.
Okay.
So the Antrim County Prosecutor's Office refiled against him after the Court of Appeals overturned Judge Rogers.
Okay.
We went to trial. We tried to get the case stayed pending the Supreme Court ruling on this matter.
Right.
And Judge Michael Haley refused to grant the stay, and he forced us to go to trial with Mr. Williams, and Homer Williams was convicted at trial. And subsequent to that, now the Michigan Supreme Court has come out and totally overturned that Court of Appeals opinion. So it was like the Antrim County Prosecutor's Office waited for a ruling that was in their favor to recharge an individual.
Right.
And what are they doing to correct it now that there's a ruling that has totally overruled the one that they relied on to recharge this individual? I don't think they've lifted a finger to try and correct that wrong.
Well, we could probably go on for another hour, Eric. I appreciate it. We'll have to have you back if you're willing. I want to thank you for coming in. And folks, we'll direct you to any number of websites. We'll show a couple here on the screen. I'll post the link on our blog. It's thebriefingroom.org. But Eric's got videos at vimeo.com, the Michigan cannabis, the medical marijuana law. He's got a forum up at michigancannabispatients.com. You can obviously see videos from him on Up North Media Center as well, and theexaminer.com. So there's a whole lot out there by Eric VanDussen, and you can learn more about any number of the stories that Eric's done. Eric, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And again, I want to thank Amy Reynolds at Horizon Books for letting us shoot on location, and Joe Carter and Andrea Dooley for helping us out here on location this morning as well from Up North Media Center. I'm Bill Froehlich on The Briefing Room. We'll see you again next time.